meeting. We want to thank our witnesses, Mr. Atkinson, Mr. Reid, for being here. Mr. Coy is, I think, running a little bit behind, but we'll start with you two gentlemen, and hopefully Mr. Coy shows up. So, Mr. Atkinson, you go ahead. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We'd like to thank the committee for providing the Canadian Construction Association, or CCA as it's known by its acronym, with the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Michael Atkinson, and I'm the president of the association. CCA is the national association representing Canada's non-residential construction sector. We have some 20,000 individual member firms from coast to coast to coast, and these people build everything other than single-family dwellings, including our nation's public infrastructure. Collectively, we are more than 64 local and regional associations across Canada and some 10 affiliated partner associations, including, I believe, the one whom appeared before you last week, and that's Merit Canada. I'm also happy to be here with our colleagues from Progressive Contractors Association of Canada. Their members are mostly, if not all, members of our organization as well. And I should say right from the start that we represent construction companies regardless of their labor relations affiliation. We represent unionized contractors who have collective bargaining agreements with the traditional building trade unions. We represent contractors who have union affiliation with CLAC, and we represent contractors who are non-union. So we represent all of those organizations under one umbrella. Canada's construction industry strongly supports fair and open competition in the procurement of all public sector contracts. From our perspective, public procurement should never contain preferential policies that favor one type of contractor over another based on their labor management policies, their region or origin, or any other form of arbitrary preference. A fair and open tendering process provides the public owner with the widest variety of choice in pricing, thereby ensuring the highest rate of return on scarce taxpayer dollars. It is from this perspective that I say to you today that CCA member firms oppose the use of any limitations on the tender process other than those that are technical in nature or compulsory due to applicable prevailing legislation or laws. Similarly, we are opposed to the use of federal funding to support own force infrastructure construction and maintenance by public entities, unless the work is awarded based on a level playing field in a truly fair and open competitive tendering process. For this reason, we strongly support the inclusion of language in the soon-to-be negotiated federal-provincial infrastructure funding framework agreements that prohibits the use of federal funds to support projects awarded under unreasonable preferences or exclusionary tender policies or awarded directly to public entities without the benefit of a truly competitive tendering system. And the one caveat there is a situation where the limitations are required by applicable prevailing law. Moving to red tape, Mr. Chair, which is also the subject of this committee. We'd like to help stretch infrastructure dollars under the new Building Canada plan by ensuring that environmental assessment, the kinds of practices that were used on the stimulus program, for example, and with the new environmental assessment reforms that have been introduced and are now in law, that we strongly support these changes because it reduces needless overlap. We're talking about situations in which provincial jurisdictions or jurisdictions that are closer to that work, closer to those projects, where they perform environmental assessments that are up to the standards that are expected for those projects, that there is no need for the federal government to have a duplicative process review or assessment or otherwise. And we expect to see the kinds of good lessons that we learned on the stimulus program, and indeed that have been enshrined in the new environmental legislation, used on those projects to ensure certainty and to ensure timeliness. Similarly, we believe that the use of the expedited application processes that were used under the stimulus program also be adopted. We heard how, in many cases, municipalities and other entities under the stimulus program had one-page application forms, had the red tape, if you will, and the bureaucracy that was normally associated with trying to get a project approved under one of those programs very much fast-tracked. So, as the expression went, we could get shovels in the ground very quickly. The kind of lessons we learned there, we'd like to see continued in the infrastructure programs. But, you know, reducing red tape shouldn't just be limited to the Building Canada plan. We also see scope for the elimination of red tape on federal infrastructure projects that could yield similar cost savings. In particular, one example is industrial security clearances. Contractors today are required to obtain industrial security clearances for their firms and their employees on federal government projects from each of the government departments for which they are working. Since ultimately CSIS and the RCMP do all the clearances, a single clearance should suffice. However, what we've found in situations is that there is no recognition or reciprocity as between departments on these industrial security clearances. Hence, there's duplication, uncertainty, and cost added to our industry in order to bid and work on these projects. We understand that there are measures being considered that would address that, but they can't come too soon from our perspective. Additionally, we're also concerned about the red tape cost and burden that may be added to federal projects if measures announced in the recent federal budget aren't done so with full consultation with the industry, in particular the measures to engage or promote apprenticeship on federal construction projects, and indeed to encourage other levels of government to do so through the Building Canada plan. While we absolutely agree with the intent of the program to get more apprentices trained and completed through their apprenticeship, we want to ensure that the measures that are put in place are not arbitrary, are meaningful, are effective, understood, and certain, so they do not create an unneeded barrier or additional red tape for contractors participating on those projects. And finally, Mr. Chairman, one other issue when it comes to competition, and that's with respect to public-private partnerships. Now, although P3s are not publicly funded, there is an unfair competitive situation that has arisen with Canadian contractors participating on P3 projects here in Canada, and it has to do with respect to foreign companies being able to use their export credit agencies to help them with obtaining letters of credit or other kinds of liquid security that are being required by long-term lenders on projects here in Canada. Our members have been able to take advantage of Export Development Canada's domestic powers. You'll recall that this was a temporary measure that was introduced as part of the stimulus program. While there are now proposals to restrict access by Canadian firms to those domestic powers. And we believe that will significantly limit the ability of Canadian firms to compete on a level playing field with foreign construction firms on major P3 projects that are eligible for EDC domestic financing, because they will have their export credit agencies in tow when they compete on those projects. So, Mr. Chair, I think I'm going to stop there and be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Atkinson. We now move to Mr. Sean Reid. 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of the Progressive Contractors Association of Canada to share our perspective on how competition can make infrastructure dollars go further. PCA commends the committee for initiating this study, which addresses a topic of critical interest to our member companies and their employees. We believe it should also be an issue of great importance to every Canadian. Let me start by introducing our organization. Progressive Contractors Association of Canada represents and supports progressive, unionized employers in Canada's construction industry. Our member companies employ over 25,000 skilled tradespeople across Canada, unionized primarily by the Christian Labour Association of Canada, a unique and modern union not affiliated with the Canadian Labour Congress or the traditional building trades unions, and my colleague Brendan will speak more about them in a few minutes. PCA's goal as an association is to ensure that Canada has a fair and open construction industry, cooperative labor relations, and a robust and inclusive and highly capable workforce. We believe in open competition in which no sector is given artificial or unfair advantage over another based on union affiliation or lack thereof. PCA contractors are very much at the center of infrastructure construction in Canada. Today, our member contractors are building over 40 water treatment and wastewater facilities across Ontario alone, and several more throughout Western Canada. Our members built the Sea to Sky Highway, the Port Mann Bridge, and the Pitt River Bridge in British Columbia. And much of the Anthony Henday Ring Road around Edmonton was built by a PCA company. Our members account for 40% of all energy and resource sector construction in BC and Alberta. Several members of this committee may also be familiar with the work our member companies did in building the terminal buildings at Toronto's City Centre Airport. In short, our member companies are leaders in building Canada's economy and infrastructure that supports it. Yet, despite our clear qualifications, regulations and policies in several Canadian provinces and municipalities prevent our members and their workers from bidding on many federally funded infrastructure projects. Not because we aren't qualified to do the work, but simply because our unionized employees are not unionized by certain select privileged trade unions. The scope of this issue is substantial. In Ontario, public infrastructure projects in the City of Toronto, the City of Hamilton, the City of Sault Ste. Marie, and the Greater Essex County District School Board are all off limits to PCA member firms. In Manitoba, major infrastructure projects such as the Red River Floodway Expansion Project and the East Side Road Project are off limits to PCA member firms. In addition, projects for Ontario Power Generation, Hydro One, Bruce Power, and Manitoba Hydro are all the exclusive domain of a handful of trade unions and their affiliated contractors, not PCA members and our workers. The committee has heard testimony over the last 2 weeks on the scope and cost of this issue of closed tendering. PCA would like to underline the following. First, this is not a static problem. It's one that is growing. This is not about fair wages and employee compensation. In addition to being an issue of fiscal and economic responsibility, it is also one of fairness for all Canadians. Let me elaborate. The issue of closed tendering is not a static problem, but rather a problem that is growing. In Ontario, the first restrictions began in Toronto and Sault Ste. Marie decades ago. Then, in 2005, the City of Hamilton became subject to a tendering monopoly exclusive to the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America. Today, it appears that the region of Waterloo will soon be subject to the same Carpenters Union-only restrictions. In December 2012, the Carpenters Union applied to the Ontario Labour Relations Board to certify the region of Waterloo. If certification is granted, not only would the region's employees become members of the union, the region would also be prevented from contracting with any company whose employees were not members of the Carpenters Union. While the matter is still before the board, industry consensus is that certification will be successful and Waterloo will be the site of Canada's newest construction monopoly. As a result, some $200 million of Waterloo's annual capital budget will be subject to closed tendering, bringing the total scope of the closed tendering crisis in Ontario municipalities alone to approximately $1 billion annually. Let me provide one other quick example of how closed tendering will impact Waterloo. Since December 2009, the region has tendered over $140 million worth of water and wastewater infrastructure projects. 27 companies pre-qualified to bid on those highly specialized projects. If closed tendering had been in place, over that same period, only 2 companies would have pre-qualified to bid on those projects. As I'm sure you know, when you shrink a potential market of bidders by over 90%, costs will inevitably go up, and they will go up dramatically. And unless something is done to permanently put a stop to this, we have every reason to believe that further municipalities in Ontario and in other regions of Canada will soon be closed off. Contrary to the opinions of some, this is not about fair wages or employee compensation. The City of Hamilton had a fair wage policy in place prior to being certified by the Carpenters Union. And yet, once closed tendering began, city staff reported that the costs of major infrastructure projects, such as water treatment plants, would inflate by 40%, simply because of dramatically reduced competition. PCA members are ready to adhere to fair wage policies if necessary. We simply want the right to bid, regardless of union affiliation of our workers. Let me quote the City of Hamilton City Councillor Lloyd Ferguson, who's the chair of the city's Public Works Committee, from a February news article about closed tendering. He said, quote, "It's a huge issue. It's a very difficult issue for us. Less competition, higher price. It's that simple. Government money should be spent to the best qualified, lowest bid contractor, not because of any particular union affiliation." We could not have said it better ourselves. Finally, closed tendering is not only an issue of fiscal and economic responsibility, it's also one of fairness and equality for all Canadians. How can it be that in 21st century Canada, a tax-paying skilled tradesperson or small business owner in Hamilton can be systematically excluded from the right to bid on publicly funded projects in his or her own city? This is not because of lack of skill, it's not because of lack of experience, but because the person carries the wrong union card or no union card at all. As Canada finds itself in the midst of mounting fiscal challenges for governments at all levels, PCA is asking the federal government to take action. It's time to address the needless cost inflation of closed tendering and construction labor monopolies. We are asking the federal government to help solve this growing problem once and for all by instituting a requirement that all federally funded projects be subject to fair and open tendering, regardless of union affiliation or lack thereof. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Reid. And now, Mr. Coy, welcome. Thanks for coming. 10 minutes.
And good afternoon. I apologize for my tardiness. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the committee on behalf of the Christian Labour Association of Canada, or CLAC. The issue of fair and efficient use of federal infrastructure funding is one that is critically important to CLAC and our members. But more importantly, this is an issue which gets to questions of basic democratic fairness in Canada. We are very encouraged that it is now being studied and discussed at this level, and we are pleased to be able to share our thoughts with this committee. CLAC is an independent, multi-sector, all-Canadian trade union that was founded in 1952 and now represents over 55,000 workers across the country in a variety of industries, but particularly for the purposes of this committee in construction and mining. To date, CLAC is recognized by 5 different provincial labor relations boards, the Canadian Industrial Relations Board, and has been certified over 2,000 times as a trade union. CLAC was founded upon Christian social principles such as integrity, partnership, fairness, respect, and community. CLAC takes a cooperative, common-sense approach to labor relations. Nationally, CLAC represents over 42,000 workers in the construction industry. These workers work for some of the leading contractors in Canada: PCL, Leadcore, Peter Kiewit & Sons, JV Driver, Maple Rinders, North America Construction, and work on some of the major public and private sector projects across the country. In the construction industry, CLAC stands out from the single craft international building trades unions in that it represents workers of multiple trades under one collective agreement. This approach promotes less jurisdictional work disputes, greater workplace cooperation, and increased efficiency on the job site. CLAC's approach, while unique, is just one example of other alternative construction unions in Canada. It used to be that in order to work on major infrastructure projects in Canada, workers had to join old-style craft unions represented by the building trades. In those days, particularly the 1950s and 60s, the international building trades unions were seen as the only solution available for providing the stability needed in the industry. However, times have changed. There are now more options for construction workers in Canada, and these new approaches to labor have developed into mature, effective organizations. Construction workers can still choose to be members of the international building trades unions. They can also choose to not to join a union, or they can choose to join one of the many alternative unions such as CLAC, the Communication, Energy and Paper Workers Union, the International Woodworkers Alliance, the Canadian Construction Workers Union, and the list goes on. We firmly believe that construction workers in Canada should have the right to join a union of their choice or not to join a union at all. We believe that as both citizens and taxpayers, workers should have equal access to perform construction work on public infrastructure projects that their tax dollars pay for, regardless of what their union affiliation is. Denying citizens access to publicly funded work because of private choices is unfair and runs contrary to Canadian democratic principles. Unfortunately, today in Canada, from Toronto to Waterloo, from Manitoba to BC, workers across this country are denied access to work on projects that their tax dollars pay for. Mr. Chair, we would like to point out three very detrimental effects that public infrastructure construction monopolies have on Canadians, sacrificing things like price, priorities, and principles. Let me begin with price. Mr. Reid has already spoken very concisely on the matter. I would like to offer a couple more examples. The evidence is clear. Construction monopolies mean that the federal government pays anywhere between 10 to 40% more or receives 10 to 40% less for its infrastructure investments. Recently, the federal government invested $755 million in two large infrastructure projects in Toronto, the Spadina subway line and the Union Station revitalization. It has also invested in a separate project, $46 million, on the Duffin Creek water pollution plant in Durham, just outside of Toronto. The first two projects were closed for bidding. The latter was open. Mr. Chair, CLAC members built that Duffin Creek water pollution plant, but were not allowed to work at Union Station or on the Spadina project. The only difference between the Duffin Creek project and Union Station is a municipal line. I ask, is this fair to those workers? Is it fair to taxpayers in these Toronto ridings that their federal tax dollars buy up to 40% less because of a municipal line? We submit that it is not. Moreover, closed bidding prevents other federal priorities from being achieved. This government has prioritized hiring apprentices and employing underrepresented groups in the construction industry, such as young workers, women, and disabled workers, as part of its jobs plan. It has also done very well by encouraging training and hiring from within Aboriginal communities. Closed bidding prevents these priorities from being met. Allow me to offer you an example of how this is currently playing out in Manitoba. Currently, all Manitoba hydro work is closed to all contractors except those affiliated with the International Building Trade Unions. To bid on Manitoba hydro work, contractors must agree to hire workers from the building trades. If non-building trades workers, such as CLAC members, wish to work on these projects, they are forced to switch unions. Ledcor, a firm that works across the country and is signatory to CLAC, is interested in bidding on the next hydroelectric dam project, but is presently excluded from doing so. Meanwhile, there is unhappiness amongst the Manitoba Métis and Aboriginal populations that building trade contractors are not meeting their local hiring obligations. With the bidding process closed, infrastructure work is bound to be only done by the International Building Trades Unions. Unions which may do a better job of fulfilling the government's goals of employing apprentices, young workers, and Aboriginals are shut out of the process. This limits the pool of private sector stakeholders which can assist the government to meet its job creation priorities. Finally, let me address what we believe to be the most important point: principles. Mr. Chair, the result of closed bidding is a breach of fundamental democratic principles that public funds and public projects should be open to all qualified workers regardless of their private association, in this case, their union affiliation. CLAC members, workers who belong to alternate unions, and non-union workers are all barred from being able to access publicly and in many cases federally funded projects across the country. Due to closed bidding restrictions, these Canadians cannot work in communities in which they pay taxes, not because they're not skilled, trained, or proven workers, but because they belong to the wrong union. Let me be clear, this is not an anti-union issue. This is a fairness issue. We do not submit that the government should seek to deprive workers of their right to join a trade union. However, it is neither good nor fair public policy to allow one or more unions to monopolize publicly funded work. Over the past decade, we have unfortunately seen the amount of construction monopolies across the country grow. The City of Hamilton, the City of Waterloo, the Toronto Transit Commission, BC Hydro Projects, Manitoba Hydro Projects. The question you should be asking yourselves is, will you allow this problem to continue to spread. Infrastructure spending has and will continue to be an integral part of the federal government's budget, and it is quite reasonable for the government and for taxpayers to expect that that money be spent fairly and competitively. Mr. Chair, we encourage this committee and the federal government to continue to pursue solutions to these problems. We believe that as a first step, the federal government can adjust procurement requirements for projects that receive federal infrastructure funding to prevent against voluntary project labor agreements with only selective unions. Provinces or municipalities cannot be allowed to be hoodwinked into agreeing to project labor agreements that restrict open tendering and access because of union affiliation or lack thereof for tax-paying Canadians. Additionally, CLAC believes that the government should make it a priority to invest in a study to find out the true costs of for taxpayers of construction monopolies across the country. Taxpayers have a right to know what the exact costs and job access implications are of closed construction markets in Canada. Thank you for your time today. I will be happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Coy. And we'll now start with Mr. Aubin, 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. I have only 7 minutes, and obviously it's far too little for all my questions, and I'd like to have answers from all three of you, so we'll try and share the time. Now, there's an interesting point that comes out of the presentation, and that is that there seems to be a distinction made between the principle of open bidding, an open bidding process, and another issue which has to do with increased costs in cases where it's closed bidding. And it seems to me that we're going from one to the other rather quickly, as there being, in terms of a cause and effect relationship, which isn't always the case. Do you have any examples? Setting aside the unions, if we're talking about a project where there's only one accredited bidder, and where we're preventing, where other competition is prevented. Do you have examples of that?
I just want to clarify to make the point that our position is that we would oppose any kind of restriction or limitation. And whether or not that's going to impact competition is going to be really dependent upon the marketplace. For example, we would also be here telling you we're very much opposed to a public entity restricting competition to non-union contractors, particularly in a marketplace where they don't have much of the market share, because it's likely to impact the competition. Similarly, we've opposed and been in front of federal committees before saying that federal funds should not be supporting local or regional preference policies, where the out-of-province or out-of-county bidder has to be or 10 or 50%.
Je pense que j'entends bien ce.
Thank you. I understand that principle. But what I'm looking for is, with respect to the equation between that restriction that does exist and the obvious increase in costs. So my second question would be, can one of your organizations tell me whether you've done any studies showing that there is necessarily an increased cost when it's closed bidding, when the process is closed?
The City of Hamilton has done its own study and found that the reduction of bidding elevated the cost, for example, of a water treatment plant by up to 40%. The City of Hamilton has also found tendering scenarios that have actually elevated the cost by up to 80%. And they've conducted that research, and I think I quoted in my my remarks the comments from the Public Works Committee chair, who reflected that said it is very clear in their experience that when you control for wage, because keep in mind they had a fair wage policy already, when you control for wages, the simple reduction of 90% of the bidders in some cases inflates the cost, and that's clearly spelled out in their experience.
J'imagine que.
I imagine that you've come up against closed bidding processes or where some of your members could not bid. So how do you explain the fact that there are a number of major municipalities or provinces that deliberately decide to apply the principle of closed bidding? There must be some advantages to that, because otherwise I imagine that officials at the municipal and provincial levels would have the same concern as all of us, which is to get the best bang for their buck.
Challenge you on that one premise that that municipalities chose to affiliate. In every Ontario case, they did not make that choice. Those were certifications initiated by the trade unions in Toronto, in Sault Ste. Marie, in Hamilton, and now in Waterloo. In every one of those cases, there was no input. And I should also say that because of the way that what happens, the way the certification system works for these municipalities, is they don't actually get any input on the terms of their collective agreement either. So this is not only involuntary certification, it's then involuntary terms and conditions by which they have to adhere. So I think that's an important statement to correct, that in fact, in most cases, jurisdictions do not choose to go this way if given the option.
So am I to understand that I should extrapolate the model that you have cited for Ontario to the rest of the provinces in Canada?
Is in many cases the case. It may not be entirely, I can't say for sure that it's the case in every single one of the situations, but certainly, again, in the case of numerous jurisdictions, there's a historical certification associated with it that was not entered into voluntarily by that jurisdiction. I can't say with 100% certainty that that's the case every time, but that is certainly the prominent case.
Monsieur Coy, dans votre
Mr. Coy, in your presentation earlier, you were suggesting, if I understood you correctly, that the committee or the government should carry out a study on the cost of monopolies. And it seems obvious or clear that there would be increased costs if we're dealing with monopolies. But is that a real issue? Are we really dealing with monopolies? Even among unionized groups, I imagine there can be some competition between them, and which assures that market principles are adhered to.
We are absolutely dealing with monopolies. Mr. Reid certainly went over several examples in Ontario, the City of Toronto, the City of Hamilton, the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Soon it looks to be the City of Waterloo as well. In Manitoba Hydro Work, the East Side Road project. In BC, all of the BC hydro work that's being done in the Columbia River Basin. Those are all situations in which, if you're not a member of the right union, and in those cases, the international building trades unions, you have no access to that work. Do I submit that that's a monopoly? Yes, absolutely.
Okay, you're out of time, Mr. Aubin. To you, Ms. St. Denis.
Merci.
Thank you. I'd like to continue along the same line of questioning as my colleague. When you say that there are increased costs of between 10 to 40%, could you describe what that 10 to 40% involves? When we're talking about closed tendering, you're saying there can be increased costs. So if there is an open bidding process, I gather there is not that increased cost. Now, is it because your unions have less money, or you say that the wages are the same, but where do the differences lie in that case in terms of the increased costs?
I'll just start by saying that one of the significant differences between certain construction companies is the model of labor of work that gets done. So in our context with the CLAC and with our contractors, there's only one union for all the workers employed in that. So if I'm an electrician and there's a board in the way and I need to get at that transformer that's behind that board, in a craft-based or traditional building trade model, that worker will actually have to wait till the laborer who's working on something else is done what he's doing so he can come over and move that board before I can access the work and start working on that transformer. That creates jurisdictional issues, that creates productivity drains that don't exist in either a non-union environment or a alternative union environment. That's one example of the difference of models. There are some advantages to some of the ways that a traditional building trade is organized, and there are advantages associated with our models. And I think where you see the cost inflation come is when you take out all of the innovation associated with the way that businesses are organized and the way that they manage productivity in their workforce and simply scale it down to one or two of virtually the same kind of company, then you see the price inflation go up. You want to add anything?
I would just say, restricting competition, whether it's through closed bidding, whether it's through putting regional preferences in and keeping non-local contractors outside, et cetera. Anytime those artificial restrictions are put on competition, one sees immediately that prices, innovation, productivity, et cetera, suffer as a result of that. There's nothing that breeds productivity and innovation greater than competition. Open, level, fair competition. And I think that's a principle that has been embraced by our country, certainly in our international dealings, certainly through the internal trade agreement, et cetera. And it's not a situation of saying, we certainly aren't saying that unionized construction costs more than non-union construction, et cetera, et cetera. What we're saying is when you restrict competition in an arbitrary manner like this, you invite those competitive pressures that work in a free and open marketplace to not work to your benefit.
Well, basically you're saying that well-organized unions that people in Canada fought for generations in order to obtain proper working conditions, that if they're not unionized or if they're in a union where anyone can do just about anything, then it would be a lot more advantageous for people such as you. That's basically what you're saying, as I understand it.
As a taxpayer here in the City of Ottawa, I would be very upset with the local city government if they restricted bidding to City of Ottawa contractors only. In the same way. So, and whether they're union or non-union, it doesn't matter. You're restricting competition for an arbitrary idea that somehow you're going to help the local economy by restricting competition to only Ottawa-based contractors. That's the point we're trying to make, is that these are artificial restrictions on competition. And again, I want to underscore, we're not union bashing here. And our association would be in front of you to complain just as vehemently if a municipality was restricting competition to non-union firms only.
What is clear is that history tells us that those labor unions, the labor movement, fought for more than anything the right to associate with whoever they wished to. If they wish to associate with a building trade union, they should have that right. If they wish to associate with a CLAC union, they should have that right. And if they wish to associate with no union at all, they should have that right. And that shouldn't preclude them from the work that they do. I believe that's actually what the labor movements fought for all those years.
Can I ask one more question? Okay. Now, with respect to P3 projects, I just have a question of clarification. You said that there was a problem with these P3 projects because of foreign industries coming in, and I'm just not sure. I'd like to get some additional clarification on that point.
these projects, because of the long-term financing involved, the financiers for performance security require liquid instruments like letters of credit. However, contractors in North America have been using the bonding industry for that performance security. They don't have the balance sheets necessarily to support letters of credit, and have been using the bonding facility to leverage their balance sheets. EDC, Export Development Canada, through its temporary domestic powers, has been able to help some of those Canadian firms obtain letters of credit, or this liquid security that's required on these projects. However, there is a proposal to further restrict the ability for Canadian companies to use EDC's domestic financing powers on these projects. And our fear is when international or foreign companies come, they have their EDC-type agency, their export credit agencies, in tow, and they have the ability to achieve that security. So our concern would be that if the measures are as restrictive as being proposed for EDC, we're concerned that that might impair the ability of Canadian firms to compete on P3 projects here in Canada.
Okay, thank you very much. Now move to Mr. Polyev, 7 minutes.
Madame Saint-Denis suggested that you were trying to direct, you in the CLAC were trying to direct business away from unionized workers. You represent unionized workers. You are a union at the CLAC, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you obviously don't want to take business away from unions. You are a union.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that this is certainly not an anti.
You're a union,
This
right?
is not an anti-union issue. We are a union.
Okay, so that settles
we
that
represent
then.
workers.
So you probably wouldn't want to put yourself out of business by banning yourself from competing.
I don't think that'd be too smart.
Okay. And Mr. Atkinson, you're not in favor of banning unions from competing either.
No.
And in open competitions, some of your unionized members actually win
Absolutely.
against their non-union counterparts.
Absolutely.
And we're in favor of that happening when they're the most meritorious bidder. I think all of us should be. You're just saying level playing field, open competition, best team wins. Okay. Are any of you familiar with the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights?
I couldn't recite it for you, but I
Well, I can with the help of my iPad. Article 20 says no one may be compelled to belong to an association. Do you believe that the forced union monopoly on construction in Hamilton and other similar jurisdictions is a form of compelled association?
In my opinion, workers certainly lose an element of choice in those circumstances. If you're a carpenter today living in the city of Hamilton, certainly you lose the ability to work on a good chunk of work in your own city, that being public infrastructure work.
The same article allows for freedom of association. So there's a positive freedom and also a negative freedom. I just mentioned the negative. The positive one is that you have the freedom to associate with an organization. If you ban employees in Hamilton, workers in Hamilton, in the construction field from working with the CLAC or another non-qualifying union, are you not violating their freedom of association rights?
I can just speak to that a little bit. So one of our largest members in Ontario almost exclusively does water treatment work, and they self-perform virtually all that work, which means that they have plumbers, carpenters, laborers, electricians, the whole thing, hundreds of workers. They cannot do a single water job in the city of Hamilton. Workers who've worked for this company for 25 years cannot do work in the city that they live in Hamilton. This company is based about 10 minutes outside of Hamilton. cannot do work. If they want to do work in what they've been trained to do, which is build water treatment plants in the city of Hamilton, they have to go find another company to work for.
Or move.
Or
Another
move.
city. So here we have a government policy that is banning someone from being part of the union that they want to join if they want to continue to work in their field.
Effectively, yes.
That seems to be a clear-cut violation of both the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and Section 2D of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees freedom of association and is the very basis upon which labor associational rights are resting. Let's look at the situation in Kitchener-Waterloo. I'm going to read from an article by Peter Sean Taylor, who's the editor-at-large of Maclean's Magazine, who lives in Waterloo. He says, in Hamilton, 2 workers signed carpenters' union cards and were thus able to impose a union agreement on the entire city forever. As a result, the pool of eligible bidders for construction contracts in Hamilton was reduced by over 90%. Of the 260 firms that had previously bid on the city jobs, city staff calculated that only 17 were affiliated with the Carpenters Union, end quote, thus reducing competition by roughly 90 to 95%. He goes on, Hamilton calculations show a 10% increase in costs due to a union monopoly rules, or about $4 million to $10 million per year for routine capital projects. With regards to a massive $1.1 billion wastewater treatment plan, the cost is estimated at an additional 20 or 40%. Like we're talking $200 to $400 million in extra costs as a result of a monopoly that the province imposes on the city of Hamilton.
That would be the same would be true for the light rail project, $800 million light rail project in Waterloo that's that has about $200 million of funding from the federal government in it.
And in the city of Toronto, quote, even a 10% hike amounts to $20 million in extra costs on a $200 million. She's referring to a $200 million project. Sorry, in Toronto, Councillor Karen Stintz has put the price of restrictive union rules at $100 million a year. We're talking about serious money here. So we're making it, this policy is making it impossible for a lot of seniors to stay in their homes because they can't afford the annual tax increases to pay for inflated infrastructure prices on their property tax bill.
And more than that, it's the price of monopoly in a large municipality like Toronto, where there's $100 million flushed down the drain. You could build 4 water treatment plants in smaller municipalities in southern Ontario with that money. Like there are for every monopoly that exists in a large urban municipality, there are 5 or 6 or 7 municipalities of a smaller scale that are getting the short end of the stick.
And people are sitting in gridlock traffic because municipalities say they can't afford infrastructure upgrades. Meanwhile, we're seeing $200, $400 million in price inflation on a single project in one municipality alone. Mr. Atkinson, what percentage of your members are unionized, the businesses that you represent? I
don't have a figure on that because that's something that we wouldn't ask them to report on. But if you go by market share, it's whatever the market share is. It would be approximately the same percentage.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tote. 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests this afternoon. I want to start with Mr. Reid, and I was hoping you could expand on a comment that you made in your statement. And you said the Manitoba Red River floodway expansion is off limits to PCA contractors. And I know there's many that would argue that that would not be the case, that there's a difference of opinion in that. I'd like you to articulate why you would make that statement and how you see that very clearly defined as they are not allowed to be on that site.
I think, I can't speak too much to that specific project, but generally in Manitoba the situation is this, and I think Brendan kind of articulated this a little bit as well. You have, technically, in some cases, you can go and work on one of those infrastructure projects, as long as you join the right union. So you essentially, to Mr. Poilievre's point earlier, so long as you're willing to forfeit your right to freely associate, you can go work on the Red River project. We think that's, and our workers think that is an unacceptable option. We have companies that, because of the unique labor model that we enjoy, self-perform, as I mentioned earlier, self-perform all the work, which means they have hundreds of different tradespeople that are fiercely loyal to that company, that have worked there for many years. And the company will not, that's their business model. They've built their business model on having these employees on their team. They're not going to suddenly wake up one day and pretend they're a building trades company and forfeit their business model. That's unacceptable to the business owners as well.
Mr. Coy, could you comment on the same thing? Because you talked about Manitoba Hydro and the International Building Trade Workers Union that you had to be a member of there. Is that something that have you had any discussion with Manitoba Hydro on the reason for those parameters? Have you ever had an opportunity to interact with them on that?
But personally, myself, no. But I know that my colleagues in Manitoba absolutely have, and unfortunately, they've made little headway in that regard. My understanding of the situation in Manitoba is that Manitoba Hydro is not under any contractual obligation to sign project labor agreements on things like hydro projects or the East Side Road or the Red River floodway expansion to give that work to building trades unions. However, that's exactly what's happening. And a lot of those large projects are receiving federal funding. So you can imagine our frustration as a union and the frustration of Mr. Reed's members, our signatory contractors who are affiliated with CLAC, who are told essentially you cannot bid on those contracts and that work unless you want to operate under the building trades model. And for our members, as Mr. Poilievre pointed out, they have freely chosen to associate with CLAC for whatever reason. We think they're good reasons, and we respect that. And so it's frustrating for those workers as well to be told, no, your company cannot employ you on those projects unless you decide to be forced to switch unions.
Thank you. Mr. Atkinson, I was very intrigued by a comment that you made, and it's something different, something we hadn't really heard throughout the testimony that we've had so far, and that's you talked about the environmental assessment aspect of things and some of the changes in the environmental assessment and the, one project, one assessment that's been brought forward. I just wanted to clarify with you on that. Would you support any weakening in the environmental protection in that process, or are you very strongly convicted of the fact that the assessment must be equivalent? So if you went with a provincial assessment, it must be equivalent of a federal assessment or better, and that the protection should never be allowed to be dropped, but that it must be maintained at a very high level?
We've always said that we support diligent, vigilant environmental assessment. Our problem is we have to wait for that green light to go on to develop a project. The worst thing that can happen is the green light goes amber or goes red because of lack of certainty of the process, and that's what has been causing the problem. Absolutely, we want to see an environmental process that truly hits the intended purpose of the legislation, lives up to that standard. But we want to ensure that when that process is undertaken, it's done on a timely basis and it's done in a certain basis, so that when the green light goes on and allows our members to develop that project, we can go with confidence in knowing that that light's not going to go amber or red again because of the assessment process being questioned or because of overlapping jurisdictions. That's the problem. The problem was never one with protecting the environment. The problem was with the red or green tape that was associated with an uncertain, unclear, and untimely process.
And from experience, you've run into a situation where it was green and then went amber or red. And
Yes.
Any idea what kind of cost that would add to some projects?
Sometimes the entire project's gone.
Right.
The investors have said, look, we don't have to do it here in Canada.
So the uncertainty drives the investor away, even so the project doesn't happen, period, which is
Correct.
a great loss. So never mind whether it's done efficiently in the construction phase. It's a
When it
loss.
comes to the private sector and money, certainty is everything.
Yeah. Very good. Just a general question for each of you, and because we keep on coming back to the fact that the open tendering and the open process, and I'm a big supporter of that process going forward. However, would you also believe that the ability of the company to perform the work is obviously a very important component of it? Their ability to do that work safely should be an important component, and also their understanding of there's sometimes a historical context, right? Why you would prefer a particular supplier because he has a historical knowledge of that particular field. You talked about wastewater, but if an expansion on a wastewater facility, there may be a good reason that you may not go with the lowest tender because there's a historical understanding of that particular facility that would give an advantage. Now, it quite often also gives a price advantage, but it may not necessarily be the case. I guess what I'm saying is price absolute bottom line on everything to you, or do you see that there has to be a need to be able to look at the overall picture?
Well, there's many project delivery methods and many contracting methods, and not all of them are assessed or evaluated on price alone. In fact, P3 projects are a perfect example of that. Essentially, it's a design-build project from the point of view of the actual construction. Yes, it can involve operation, maintenance, and financing. But in a design-build situation, price is not the only criteria because you are looking also at the elements of the design that best fits the owner's needs with respect to its ongoing operation and maintenance of that facility. So the owner themselves can very much pick the criteria, and we don't have a problem with that, provided the criteria is well known to the bidders and is applied in an even and fair manner.
I would just add that that's essentially what a robust pre-qualification process is supposed to accomplish. It's supposed to accomplish, is this a safe, reputable, experienced, otherwise competent firm to do this work? And then once we've whittled that group, the pretenders out, then we have a competition between that may get down to eventually the lowest bid. But what you're talking about is essentially what any competent municipality or jurisdiction will do with a pre-qualification process.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sullivan?
Thank you.
5 minutes.
What percentage of your collective agreements are voluntary certs as opposed to board-ordered certifications with votes?
I can't speak to those exact statistics at this time.
But are there like 25%, 40%? You have no idea?
But
there is some.
There are some, and I would challenge you to look at other unions pass it as well, because their voluntary recognitions are something that happens across the board.
Okay. Mr. Atkinson, you suggested that there should be no limitation on, except for, your words were technical or by a law, on how the federal government does its contracting. So, but what I'm hearing from you three is something to do with provincial or municipal laws, not federal laws. And so
well,
we're not, I don't think the federal government's going to put any limitations, although they have suggested that there should be perhaps some of their hiring of through apprenticeships should be attached to some of their money. But there are no federal laws or requirements that would limit the spending of federal money, are there?
Well, I just want to make, on the principle and the point, we want open, free competition without restrictions. How you get there may be where we, on the fine point of how you get there and how you would use infrastructure agreements to do that. That's where we introduce this caveat of be sure what you're doing in those circumstances, because the City of Hamilton may be a perfect example. It's not by choice that the City of Hamilton finds itself in that situation. So is the remedy, the appropriate remedy there to cut off federal funding? I mean, that's the second question. And I think that's where your question is going, and that's why I answered it that way.
I would just add, if I may, just add that I don't think we would ever quibble with the federal government insisting on certain environmental standards on infrastructure projects. It seems perfectly to make sense to me that they would also seek to uphold basic fairness when it comes to freedom of association.
Well, except that this government has told us on a number of occasions that they are not in the business of telling the provinces and municipalities how to spend their money, or indeed how to spend the money the federal government gives them. So that this, on a number of occasions, we have suggested a federal public transit strategy, for example, and it was rejected on the basis that the federal government is not going to tell municipalities what to do and how to do it. And I would assume that they would take the same position with regards to the use of how a municipality governs itself is up to that municipality, and I would assume they would take the same position. They also take the position that competing with foreign firms is something they are in fact seeking. That in the comprehensive agreement on trade with Europe, the government seeks to correct the mistakes they made in the free trade agreement with the United States, whereby no competition is permitted from across the border on local or provincial contracting. That they will correct with the agreement with Europe, where European firms will be free to bid on municipal and provincial things, which flies in the face of one of the things you were looking for. So I say you've got an uphill battle with this government.
Our hope is that this committee will be united in believing that it makes that fairness and freedom of association is something worth for this federal government to stand up for. I would hope that everybody on this committee would agree with that.
I guess that there's a different definition of what is fair and what is not fair. If a municipality determines that it's in its best interest to hire locally, which is something Mr. Atkinson suggested was not a good thing, that seemed fair to the individuals who lived in the area around the project that was being built. So in my humble riding of York South-Weston, which has the lowest wages in Toronto and the second lowest in all of Ontario, the lowest family income, we have suggested to the province, if they're going to spend what was supposed to be $300 million, but because of cost overruns, and they are using non-union contractors, we're now at $2.5 billion for this project, that they should be spending some of that on training apprentices and on hiring people locally. They're not interested, and yet that's one of the good things the federal government has signaled that they want to do, but it's one of the things you've suggested, Mr. Atkinson.
Not hiring locally. We're opposed to regional preferences for businesses. In other words, a situation where it says if price is the only criteria, you still got to be 10 to 15% lower than the local guy. And that can contribute to a situation in which you scare away non-local bidders completely, or you have a situation in which you're subsidizing local business, and all you're doing is subsidizing local business in a way that they can't compete because they're going to find it awfully difficult when they get out in the real world.
Your time's up, Mr. Sullivan. I know you were eager to go, but Mr. Watson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing here. Closed competition, does it occur in federal funded projects only as opposed to those where we participate with lower levels, lower jurisdictions of government, the province and municipalities?
It's occurring in federally funded and jointly funded projects. So
which federally funded projects that you're aware of?
When I say federally funded, I mean in most cases joint projects.
I'm asking where the federal government is the direct funder because it's a federal asset.
There are, to my knowledge, there are no examples of federal assets today that have been built subject to closed tendering protocols.
So this is essentially happening in projects that are where we're joining provinces and municipalities.
Correct.
In funding. Okay. So this closed tendering itself is occurring under provincial labor laws.
Closed tendering is occurring. I suppose some of the guiding parameters exist.
It's the ease with which they can certify and obtain a monopoly within a given municipality. Is that a fair way of
I think
crystallizing it?
what's important is here is that the federal government is contributing hundreds of millions of dollars to projects.
That's not lost on me. Maybe I'm picking up a little bit on where Mr. Sullivan was going. I don't expect the federal government is going to ask the province to change its labor laws in order to discourage the practice. The practical question is, what can the federal government do when it is participating in a joint funded project where this is an issue?
Well, I'm going to skip to another irritant that we have.
Well, I actually like an answer to my question rather than skipping to another irritant. But
well, what can the federal government do? Well, one thing it can do is ensure competition, period, and don't fund projects that are going to be constructed by own forces, by municipal forces themselves.
Is that legally high risk, do you know, or do you have an opinion on
Ask Nova Scotia. And the province of Nova Scotia right now has got its own asphalt plant, its own chip seal plant, and by its own admission is still 40% higher than what the private sector was offering them.
Good. Closed competition. Somebody mentioned that there's. I think Mr. Reid, it was you that said that the Greater Essex County District School Board was one area where you are shut out of competing. Penny Allen, who is the superintendent and treasurer of the school board, has been quoted in media citing that the extra costs associated with closed tendering are in the range of 10 to 20%. She knows that because for 3 years, I think it was, she tracked every single purchase order on this in order to extricate themselves from one of 6 unions that they were certified under. So that is an example where we have a body that has been able to quantify the cost of close competition. Now, that doesn't involve federal funding, but it gives, I think, a credible local example where that happens. Now, open competition has its own challenges. The practice of using MRFs, the market, and what do they? I forget what it's for now. STAB, stabilization funds, JTFs, job transition funds. Do you, Mr. Coy, does CLAC use MRFs or STABs or anything similar when it is hoping to bid on contracts?
No, we never have, and I don't see us doing that anytime in the future. Do you mind me elaborating on that point?
No, that's sufficient.
Okay.
How could the federal government address, in an open competition situation, that kind of level playing field in bidding, where that would not be? Can we prohibit that from entering the equation in bidding?
Personally, I don't think that that's an issue that the federal government would want to take on. I think that's a prime example where workers have the ability to select to join one union or another. CLAC does not subscribe in the theory of stabilization funds or creating this pool which its signatory contractors can dip into.
If the federal government is funding a project that is won by a union using a STAB or a MRF, we are in effect replenishing the STAB or MRF and allowing them to perpetuate the process of continuing to underbid others.
When members join those particular unions that do have those funds, they make the choice and take the risk, you might say, of joining a union which their contractor is paying $1, $2, $3 an hour into that STAB fund and risk that contractor being less competitive.
Mr. Atkinson, you raised the issue of industrial clearances under the red tape. You had, I think your statement was that we should eliminate them. I want to clarify that because that's the terminology I wrote down as I heard you say it. I think what I want to clarify, eliminate duplicate requirements for them from several federal agencies. Is that more what you
Correct, to have a streamlined, uniform approach.
Okay.
You're out of
just
time,
starting.
Mr. Watson.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Matheson. 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. Forgive me, I'm not sure whether it was Mr. Atkinson or Mr. Reed that talked about the difference between the craft shops and non-union contractors in terms of the ability to multitask, the freedom to have people move around a site and do various tasks. And my question is, in that sort of freer kind of situation, is there a concern or a possibility that an unskilled individual might do the work of a skilled individual, work that he or she is not competent to do, and jeopardize or compromise the quality of the work?
No. I mean, what I'm referring to are more the rudimentary things that need to get done, like moving stuff out of the way, that in order for people to do the job. This is not about somehow doing work that somebody's not qualified or certified to do. That's what certifications are for. That's what licensing is for. This is about the frankly mundane work of just being able to do your job without having to wait for somebody else to do theirs.
I suppose, but I can see where the possibility could be that someone overstepped his or her bounds and there was a problem. Now, Mr. Coy, I don't know much about CLAC. I'm awfully sorry. I'm not terribly familiar with it, so I have some questions about it. Recently the government has moved with a private member's bill to compel unions to do a lot of reporting in terms of how they undertake their business. And I'm just wondering how you feel about that new legislation, the reporting and requirements. Are they going to impact your members? Are they going to impact you? And if so, in what way?
CLAC would be subject to the exact same reporting requirements as any other trade union in Canada under Bill C-377. When the bill was first introduced, we certainly did make submissions to government in terms of some flaws that we saw with the bill. But again, to answer your question, we would be subject to the exact same reporting requirements.
What were those flaws? What concerned you?
Basically,
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we're not having a bill examination of C-377. We are talking about how to make infrastructure dollars go a little further. I think the first question was definitely in line, and I wasn't intervening on a point of order at that point to get this conversation onto the actual study. This is now departing, because now she wants commentary on C-377.
Well, Mr. Chair, I didn't interfere in Mr. Watson's line of questioning, and I don't expect him to interfere in mine.
No, I think he's just raising a point that we are on a topic today. So, Ms. Matheson, if you can stick to that topic as much as possible, that Bill 377 isn't before us. So.
Well, would Bill 377, in fact, interfere with your ability to bid competitively, to have the access that you're looking for?
No.
No? Okay, so no concerns at all in that regard.
Related to the subject matter here today, no.
Okay, and again, I'm not entirely familiar with CLAC, and I wonder in terms of your policies and how you support workers. And how your union supports workers, because obviously if you're going to be competitive and able to get these contracts that you deserve to have, you need to have a good relationship with your workers. So, for example, how do you support bargaining, and how do you feel about back-to-work legislation, things like that, or anti-scab legislation?
In terms of, I'll address the question about collective bargaining and try and bring it back to this context in saying that we negotiate very competitive collective agreements. We certainly believe in workers being paid fair market wages. And in the construction industry, as it relates to work on infrastructure projects, our members are paid very competitively, sometimes even above the wages that the international building trades unions negotiate.
And I appreciate that very much. And that kind of comes back to what Madame St. Denis was talking about. So when you talk about unfair competition, it's not wages. It's not the compensation that workers get. So where does the unfairness come from? I mean, why would a cost overrun of 40% exist with a trade union group that you would regard as having unfairly gained a contract?
Okay, go ahead and answer.
That's a very good question. I would point you to the example of the City of Hamilton. Before the City of Hamilton in 2005 became signatory to the Carpenters Union, many of our signatory contractors and our members performed work in the City of Hamilton. The City of Hamilton, prior to 2005, had a fair wage policy. Our contractors abided by that, and our members were paid under that policy. You're very, very correct in pointing out that this is not necessarily a wage or compensation issue. Speaking to the economic side of the issue, it's a lack of competition that creates those cost overruns. When you shrink the pool of bidders by over 90%, you lose the ability to possibly get a lower number on who can do a particular job. That's the economic side of it. The fairness side of the issue from our perspective is that our members have freely chosen to join our union and work for contractors who are signatory to our union. And by doing so, they find themselves on the outside looking in places like Hamilton, Toronto, and Waterloo, because they are not able to work on certain projects because their contractor is not able to bid them.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Polyev, 5 minutes.
Mr. Atkinson, do any of your members compete for business outside of Canada?
Yes.
Do you think that they would potentially compete for business in Europe?
Yes.
And if, as some suggest, Canada were to pursue anti-competitive policies that ban foreign competitors from bidding on Canadian-based projects, do you believe that European jurisdictions would ban Canadian companies from doing likewise?
I can't speak for the European countries. I can say, however, that from our perspective, our Board of Directors' position on this is that reciprocity is the key. So to the extent that those markets are open, then to Canadian firms, then the markets in Canada should be open to them. So from that perspective, reciprocity is the key.
Great. And from the point of view of the CLAC, how do you become certified as a representative of workers? In a heartbeat, we don't have a lot of time, so just what is the threshold required for your union to be certified for a bargaining unit?
We follow the exact same procedures and application procedure in every province or jurisdiction that we seek certification as other unions.
Right. So typically that means you get either a card or a vote, and you have to get 50% of the vote.
That's correct. It's nominally different in every region across Canada.
So a majority of workers who you represent have obviously chosen to be represented by you.
Yes.
Okay. And so you don't force a group of workers to join your union?
Absolutely not.
Okay. In the instance of Hamilton and now Waterloo, we have 2 workers forcing all workers to join one union. That is exactly how the certification happened. Do you think that this is a fair certification practice?
Can I just jump in? I mean, I would say it's actually more than just all the work. If this was just about the 2 workers representing the 20 carpenters that happen to be on staff for the city of Hamilton, that would be one thing. And we can argue that wouldn't be fair either. But this is actually about 2 workers making a decision for the thousands of workers in the city of Hamilton who had been doing work for the city of Hamilton before that. So
basically, 2, and in the case of Waterloo, we had again 2 workers who happened to be working on a blue shed at a library, and they were able to apply and secure certification for all of the Waterloo region. So the thousands of workers who are employed doing this kind of work in the region were certified because 2 people wanted to be.
For workers who were working on the $200 million worth of annual capital budget for the region of Waterloo, yes.
Because 2 people wanted it.
Correct.
I mean, I have never heard of a certification process in the world that works like this. I mean, there are a lot of different ways you can certify a union, but to have 2 people certify hundreds or even thousands of workers is astonishing. I mean, we have a lot of people with labor experience on the other side. I don't know if they can come up with an example where 2 people force hundreds or thousands to join a union, and then force taxpayers to pay an inflated price of 20 to 40%. How is it possible that 2 people can make that decision for all of those workers, those thousands of workers, and hundreds of thousands of taxpayers?
This is Canadian labor relations.
Oh, maybe that's the
A
problem.
little louder, Mr. Reid.
Well, this is simply the reality in numerous jurisdictions, most notably in Ontario. It's true. It doesn't make any sense. It's simply a
The
fundamental
federal government
difference.
has included a condition in its previous Building Canada agreement with Nova Scotia that protected workers and taxpayers with open competition. Is that not so?
That is my understanding, as I said before, the federal government places all kinds of conditions on transfers of money. That's what the Canada Health Act is for. You know, I mean, I would hope the federal government is in the business of placing certain conditions on fundamental rights and freedoms, and this is another fundamental right and freedom that needs some addressing.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Now have Mr. Sullivan, 5 minutes.
Thanks, Ken. One of the concerns you have is that contracts that public entities not be permitted to bid on public contracts. So I'll give you an example where that happened, where public entities were actually expressly forbidden. This federal government decided that it was time to build a rail system between Union Station and Pearson Airport, and the previous Liberal government was the one who came up with the idea. Was to cost $200 million and was going to be entirely a private sector thing, and the TTC and GO Transit were prohibited from even thinking about it. It had to be private sector. So we had a competition in which there was one bidder competing against himself. And ultimately, that bidder was awarded the contract, and the TTC and GO were not permitted to. Is that an open competition?
Well, our position would be that the public entity has the right to be able to compete in that open competition. That the problem has been, though, that there isn't any competition. There is no tender. They just decide that they're going to do that work. And we have a situation now where some public entities are not just doing their own work, but are seeking to be pre-qualified and bid on work in other provinces.
So your issue isn't with whether or not the public entity can do the work, but that it be an open competition
Correct.
between that public entity and other, which is what should have happened in the previous Liberal government's position. In fact, what ended up happening was that the competitor backed away eventually after 5 or 6 years and left it to go to do, and we're now reaping the benefits of that. In terms of non-union situations, we were made aware last time of the situation in building the Canada Line in Vancouver, which was done primarily with, or some of it was done with temporary foreign workers from Costa Rica who were paid $3.57 an hour, and who were later found, the employer, the private sector contractor, was later found to have violated the law and owes tens of thousands of dollars to those individuals. Is that something that, by going non-union, that we're going to save the taxpayers money somehow, and by paying people so little they can't afford to live? I'm
not entirely sure I'm qualified to speak to that. I don't know that you are, because neither of us are non-union. I'm a union. I represent unionized contractors, and he represents a union. So I'm not sure what to tell you on that.
But, Mr. Atkinson, you do represent contractors who are non-union.
And there's two questions in there. There's one on whether or not non-union construction can live up to the same standards and comply with the same labor conditions, et cetera, as unionized. Absolutely. Law-abiding contractors do so, and it doesn't matter what their union affiliation is. Law-abiding contractors obey the law. And as far as temporary foreign workers go, if that individual did violate the terms and conditions of the LMO, then absolutely throw the full weight of the law against them. That's an absolute situation that should not continue. Our industry, quite frankly, has used the temporary foreign worker program only because the permanent entry program up until recently didn't work for us at all. And we've streamed most of those workers into becoming permanent residents and permanent parts of our workforce. And indeed, would never want to have a situation in which we were paying them any less than what we were paying to Canadian citizens or permanent residents.
So you're saying that you are now streaming temporary foreign workers into permanent residency? I understood that was extremely difficult now.
Not under the Canadian Experience class was created just for that purpose.
So it's possible in construction anyway?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
With regards to the notion of red tape, green tape. That's the first time I'd heard green tape. And I must say, I had to chuckle when I heard it, that somehow environmental restrictions are some form of red tape turned green?
No, it's bureaucracy under the guise of environmental protection. It's not environmental assessment. It's simply jurisdictional fiefdom building and uncertain law. And what we want is a situation in which a true, vigorous environmental assessment is done once and with certainty, so that when the green light goes on, we do not get the amber and red stopping a project, delaying a project, or causing that project to go away. So it's the certainty of the process. When we talk about green tape, we're talking not about environmental protection. We're talking about the unfortunate bureaucracy that arises, has nothing whatsoever to do with environmental assessment.
You believe that a contractor should be permitted to change their construction methods in order to speed things up, even if they are in opposition to the environmental assessment that they were given?
No. No, again, it would be, again, if you have an environmental plan and you've got environmental conditions that you have to meet, that's just like meeting any condition on a contract. That's what you're law-abided to meet.
Okay, your time is up, Mr. Sullivan, and Mr. Daniels, 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. The suggestion from my colleagues across the way there is that it is riskier to actually give projects to people like yourselves. And I wonder if you can actually talk about that a little bit more. I mean, what's your track record in terms of projects that you've taken on where your members have run out of money partway through or have had gross overruns, have not completed the job on time, etc.? Can each of you talk to that?
I'm not familiar with any examples like that. We built the Port Mann Bridge, we built the Pitt River Bridge, we built 40% of the oil sands, we've built 40 water treatment plants in Ontario, we built the Centre Island Airport on time, on budget. We know how to do this stuff. We do it well. We simply want the right to bid on work regardless of our workers' union affiliation.
I can't speak so much from a contractor point of view, but one aspect that I would like to talk about is safety. And to the question, I know it hasn't come up yet, but is CLAC as safe as other unions? And I can say to that wholeheartedly, absolutely. And so in terms of a risk factor from that perspective, there is no greater risk with giving a job and worrying about health and safety issues on a site as opposed to giving a job to another contractor who is affiliated with another construction union.
Mr. Atkinson, any comments?
Well, I know that our members, in some cases, have agreements with both building trade, traditional building trades, with CLAC, and in some provinces are non-union and are also in other provinces unionized. So it's very much the same employer who uses the labor relations situation, depending upon the jurisdiction, to puts them in the best competitive position. So if you're going to take a brush and say that all those are bad and all those are good, you're talking about the same group of individuals from the employer's perspective. They're in all, they've got a foot in all the camps. And let's remember that at the end of the day, the quality of the construction, the timeliness, and its efficiency, et cetera, are all determined by independent third parties that don't care particularly what your union affiliation is.
Okay, so in reality, there is no difference in terms of the risk of giving you the contract versus one of these restricted unions who would pick up the job. And yet, they would be charging 20 to 40% more for the job.
Yeah, but our point is in restricting or limiting the competition, doesn't matter who you limit or restrict it to. That's going to impact the price. It doesn't matter whether they're union-free, whether they're traditional building trades, or whether they're CLAC. If you restrict the competition to a few, you're welcoming that kind of situation.
So when we're talking about CLAC, for example, are you collecting money on behalf of your employees that actually go to political associations, to different groups or projects that are really nothing to do with the job?
No, we do not, as a matter of conscience, send any money to political parties. We do not support any political parties provincially or federally, and we do not give any sort of directive to our members as to who to vote for.
Any comments from the other side?
No, I mean that's. I think CLAC's well known for being not using member dues or member funds to support political causes of any sort.
So that is in fact your competitive edge. You're actually being able to bring projects in at a lower price point when you compete with some of these things for those sorts of reasons, or are there other things that affect the pricing that you can bid for some of these contracts?
I would say I think there's I mean, if I was selling our contractors to you today, I'd wax eloquently about all kinds of competitive advantages. But I think Michael's absolutely right when he says this is actually simply the exercise of when you scale the number of bidders from 10 to 2, or you will get price inflation. It's just proven out time and time again. And that could be 2 non-union contractors, and you set out all the CLAC and the building trades. It could go the same way. It's the market monopoly influence that actually changes the price dramatically on these bids.
So do you want to talk a little bit about your competitive edge in terms of how you make these bid processes?
I think we have fantastic contractors who have, because of one reason is because of the labor model I talked about earlier, has significant productivity advantage over many of the competition. Yet we have a strong labor partner that ensures that our workers are well cared for and well compensated and has a strong voice. So we actually think our competitive advantage is we've taken the best of both are the other sides and brought them together, and that's what sets us apart from the rest.
Okay.
Thank you for that chance to advertise our contractors.
Thank you, Mr. Pauly. You have 5 minutes.
On the issue of competition, let's look at the Hamilton example. According to the City of Hamilton, the number of eligible bidders has dropped from 260 to 17, because those 17 were the only that were linked to the union monopoly. Of those 17, Mr. Atkinson, would it be safe to assume that not all of them would be in a position to bid on every single project?
That's probably a fair assumption, yes.
Some of them have work orders that mean they have no more capacity, and therefore they're not in the next round of bidding for projects X or Y.
Correct.
So that means that we're not talking about 17 bidders. In some cases, we could be talking about 1 or 2, because they're the only one of there's only a fraction of the 17 that are allowed are in a position to bid.
Yes.
And is there any guarantee that the 1 or 2 bidders in a scenario like that charge the extra 20 or 40% on the project, that they'll pass that all on to the worker in higher wages and benefits?
Well, you're assuming that in those situations that the inflated prices comes completely from the pricing and not from something that's unique or strange about the job to begin with, and
Right.
and that the risk allocation is normal or traditional and isn't a situation in which they're throwing money at it because more risk is being put on the private sector. So there's a lot of assumptions there.
Let me just be more precise. I'll just quote again from Mr. Taylor. With regards to a massive $1.1 billion waste water treatment plan, the cost is estimated at an additional 20 to 40%. So the price inflation linked to reduced competition. Does that extra price inflation end up in the pockets of workers necessarily?
I think you know the answer to that one.
See, what we're doing here is we're not guaranteeing higher wages. We're guaranteeing fewer bidders, which means higher costs. And we don't really know how much of those costs the employer actually passes on to the worker. In other words, this policy is not designed to help working people. It's designed to limit competition and drive up costs. Is it not?
I can't answer that question because the City of Hamilton, if you're talking about the City of Hamilton, finds themselves in this situation through no fault of their own or no desire on their part. So
Yes.
it's hard to know what's going on in their minds, but they've been very public about what the impact is. So that would suggest to me that it's a situation they would rather not be in and would like to be out of.
Well, Hamilton did not choose to be in this situation. We all agree on that. And nor is Kitchener-Waterloo choosing this labor monopoly. It is being imposed by provincial labor certification rules. Right. So was there ever a vote at either Waterloo or Hamilton City Council to favor this union monopoly?
No.
So this is, right now we have a situation where 2 employees imposed on a municipality a union monopoly imposed upon all construction workers in Hamilton the obligation to join against their will a single union, and the obligation of Hamilton taxpayers to pay 20 to 40% higher prices for projects. And finally, the obligation on the federal government to pay higher prices for the projects it funds in that jurisdiction.
Correct.
That is the sum total of this policy.
Yeah, ultimately, the sum total of this policy is taxpayers pay more, and it's particularly insulting to the tradesperson who's a taxpayer in the jurisdiction where he can't do the work.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Aben, we're finished our first round, and we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to give one question to Mr. Aben one to Ms. St. Denis, and then I have Mr. Watson and Mr. Polyev over here. So, good.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope that at one point we'll get a report that deals with more than just Edmonton, but I'm still trying to figure out why certain cities or provinces are in favor of closed bidding. Now, I was listening to what Mr. Polyev was saying with respect to the UN Declaration on Human Rights and about what doesn't work there. Now, if I was a doctor, I could claim to be protected by that declaration and say that I didn't want to be part of a professional association, or I don't want to be part of a lawyers association for that reason. But I think that there's recognition of a certain expertise when people are members of this kind of professional association. Now, based on your own experience and your own knowledge, would the municipalities or provinces that elect with closed bidding, looking for specific expertise, what are they criticizing, or what are they saying? What reasons are they giving for not allowing you to bid?
You can go ahead first.
What reasons are? Can I just clarify the question first? Are you asking what reasons are these provinces giving us for why we can't bid? Is that?
En fait, ce dont je suis à la recherche.
Well, what I'm looking for, and maybe you can tell me through the reverse, is why provinces and municipalities decide on closed bidding. It seems to me that they should be looking for certain guarantees or certain expertise, and maybe they don't believe that you have it, rightly or wrongly, but I just want to have your opinion on that.
To do this in most cases, and I don't want to I don't want to discount what we're talking about. We're talking about $1 billion in municipalities alone of capital budget annually that is subject to this monopoly, and none of the municipalities affected in that $1 billion willingly chose to be subject to these tendering monopolies.
Ms. St. Denis, one question, please.
First of all, do you work all across Canada? In other words, we talked about Europe earlier, but do you also have contracts in Quebec? And if not, why?
CLAC members currently work in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, and the Yukon, Nunavut, and Northwest Territories. We have not yet expanded into Quebec or the Maritime provinces.
Well, and if I could just add, you're actually not allowed to expand.
Yeah, that's correct. In those provinces, specifically in the construction industry, there's legislation that says these are the specific unions. In the Maritimes specifically, it's only the international building trades unions that are allowed to represent workers as construction unions in those provinces, and so there is currently a legislative bar in those provinces that prohibits us from our members from working there.
Okay. Anything further to add to that, Mr. Reid? No.
Are we talking about provincial legislation here?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Watson, one question.
Thank you. Mr. Atkinson, you raised the issue of export credit agencies, foreign export credit agencies assisting, I presume that's state financing versus commercial financing in foreign countries as an advantage for foreign P3 bidders on Canadian projects. I presume the most analogous use of EDC would be to help our companies bid on foreign P3 projects, not support domestic companies in domestic P3 bidding.
Be at a competitive disadvantage.
State financing for domestic projects when you're faced with foreign state.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pauly, I have one question.
Yes, can you elaborate on how this union monopoly has prevented Aboriginals from obtaining employment opportunities?
In the example I gave with Manitoba Hydro, really it's a lack of competition, right? So if there's one union or a group of selective unions that have sole jurisdiction over a certain amount of work, they may do things well. They may do things poorly. To take an issue like employment of local Aboriginals or the Métis population in Manitoba, we have gotten feedback from those populations that the building trades unions are in fact doing a poor job and they're not meeting their requirements. However, the situation dictates that no other group will have a chance to do it better, because simply our signatory companies and our union cannot do that work and cannot have a chance to prove ourselves in terms of how we may do that work better. I can speak to across the country. We work with Aboriginal groups to encourage apprenticeship training and local employment with Aboriginal groups. So we have a very strong track record of doing that. However, in Manitoba, unfortunately, we don't have that opportunity.
Can I just add one quick thing? Because this is not just about, and this gets back to the previous question as well, this is actually not just about CLAC versus the building trades. This is the same construction monopoly that happens in Waterloo that the Carpenters Union has affects LIUNA, the laborers union, who also do carpentry work. So in Nova Scotia, it's very much possible, or any other province, and even in some maritime provinces, if the Carpenters Union certified a municipality today, the Laborers Union International North America would be shut out just as much as the CLAC would. This is not simply one union issue. This is one union in the Carpenters Union, in many cases, having monopoly over everybody else.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Coy, Mr. Reid, and Mr. Atkinson. Thank you very much for being here, and hope everybody has a good weekend. We'll see you back here on May the 21st.